Hey everybody. So the countdown is on. I leave in like 12 hours. Yes. And I realized today that it's probably a good idea for me to make as many Ashtanga videos as I can since I'm getting ready to wrap everything up in 2018 and 2019. So today I wanted to talk about something that I've come across a lot as a teacher, more so as a teacher than a practitioner. I am not a yoga teacher who specializes in trauma, but I think it's kind of difficult to teach yoga and to help people go deeper in their practices and not come across trauma. I mean, trauma is something that happens to all of us. We store it in our connective tissues, and yoga works primarily on the connective tissues. So at some point, you're going to run up against stuff. Now, I say that I didn't confront a lot of trauma primarily because I started really young. So I didn't have a whole lot of time for things to settle in my body because 16 is really young. Most people are still cultivating who they are, really kind of until you're about 30. So if you start yoga after 30, then you're gonna have your work cut out for you more so than if you start younger. At least when it comes to working through some of the holographic imprinting that can get stored as a result of just not being conscious. So, I don't want to stir up anybody or trigger anybody. Right now the whole Me Too movement is pretty popular, and I'm not trying to get on that bandwagon, but I worked under a assisted a woman she was my mentor basically. I don't know what to call her because she has so many different hats she wears, but basically she taught me a lot about trauma, and she has a degree and she's a therapist and does psychology, and she's a peace minister and all this good stuff. But when I came to her at 20, one of the things that we discussed was the fact that I had an eating disorder. And she said, well, eating disorders are textbook for sexual abuse. And what was fascinating to me was that I couldn't recall any sexual trauma in my past. It finally came up later. And the irony was that it wasn't to me. I was a witness to someone else, but I was too young to intervene, so I interpreted it the same. Ironically, growing up, I became very protective of this individual, like fiercely protective of this individual as a result. And I never really knew where that came from until I was about 33, and finally we were able to clear some of that from my memory. But, I've worked with people who have had eating disorders, and eating disorders are basically control issues. I still struggle with body dysmorphia, which is kind of a side effect of having an eating disorder and that control issue, because what happens is when our body is violated, then we lose our boundaries, and as a result, we subconsciously go into a place of trying to manage it or control it. And so typically we take it out on the body by abusing it. It's not uncommon at all. It's definitely like one of the main ways that we go through this cycle. But the other thing that I've noticed is with that, now this is not just exclusive to someone who's been sexually abused, but anyone who has trauma in general is going to find that when they get on the mat, and even in their life in general, if they find themselves sitting too much, they don't want to be still. So what do people do is they move. They move their minds and they move their bodies. So practitioners will move very quickly because they don't want to settle into a pose, or they constantly distract the mind, and some do both. But one of the biggest parallels that I've noticed and I want to address here is the fact that, I work almost exclusively energetically when I teach, and bandhas are everything. And one thing that I just keep running up against, and so I want to talk about it, is the fact that there seems to be a connection between bandhas and personal power. And your bandhas, at least your first two bandhas, so Uddiyana Bandha and Mula Bandha or Mula Bandha, which is the base, and then Uddiyana Bandha, which is basically at your solar plexus. It's just below there. They run parallel, right? Like they're streets that run in the same direction energetically in your body. And I keep coming across this lately with students of mine who can't seem to tap into their power psychologically or in their life, and yet they also have a difficult time tapping into their bandhas. There's like a disconnect there, like an actual disconnect. They physically can't find it. And so, you have to recognize that the first three chakras are, especially the first two chakras, right? The first two chakras, we have the root chakra, which is survival, 100% survival, being fed, shelter, money. These are all survival things. And then you have your second chakra, which represents more or less your primal instincts, sexual instincts, your desires, and your reproductive system, which is where a lot of the violation comes from, is those first two chakras. Now, if those are clogged and those aren't running properly, then the third chakra, which is your power source, is not going to operate either. And ironically, they both run, like I said, parallel to Mula Bandha and Uddiyana Bandha, which if you're subconsciously trying to move away from the trauma, then it's going to be very difficult for you to find your power, okay? And then also with that comes a lot of tension in the hip flexors, tension in the outer hips as well, because we lock up. The body is incredibly powerful and intelligent. And what it does when we have a traumatic situation is it buries it and it tries to protect us from it. So oftentimes when someone is moving into an asana that they find uncomfortable, the mind starts racing as to why it's not a good idea. Okay, so the body is sending a signal to the brain saying, don't go there, because it's trying to protect you from the trauma it doesn't want you to look at. And that's when, anxiety kicks in. We want to run. We don't want to be here. We don't want to sit still. And that's when you kind of got to lean in further and dig a little deeper and breathe through it. Now, remember that trauma that exists in the body is not present day. If you're watching this video, for example, that's where your focus is. You're presently watching me talk, okay? So you're not the experience you had before, but it still gets held in the cells. And as you breathe and move through it, you have to recognize that energy, while it's alive and well, is still just using your temple, your house, your body as a resource to hold on. Your job is to detoxify it out by bringing light to it and breathing through it. But I just wanted to throw this theme out there of trauma and sexual abuse and bandhas and your core chakras, because I just keep running against this with a lot of students, and I think it's important to bring up. I was never really one to bury a lot. Like I'm kind of like that, like weird, like 10% that does things differently. So that makes me the teacher of the rest of you, I guess. I don't know, but it's like I said, just because I operate differently doesn't mean I didn't experience it. It's just I have a different way of addressing it. But yeah, I mean, I keep seeing this in so many people. And so if you really want to get honest with yourself and say, was there trauma? Did I go through something? I know the Me Too movement is so popular right now. And, if you are in alignment with that and you recognize that, I highly recommend that instead of reinforcing the pain, you kind of move into the old trauma and the wound and start to dissolve it. Okay, so you can bring light to it. And heal yourself, because when we do get wounded, the healing part is our responsibility. Life is going to happen. To try and manage what's happening outside of you is a huge waste of energy, because really all you can do is manage your responses. And so it doesn't mean you give up your standards or your morals or anything. It just means that you recognize that your true power and your true ability to manage comes from within and is about you. Okay, so You know, if you're up against a wall in the yoga practice, you don't know why your hips aren't opening, you're struggling with your hip flexors, you can't seem to pick up and jump back or find that handstand because you're missing the connection to these lower chakras and to the bandha connection, then this might be something you want to sit with and say, you know, is there something there that I've been repressing and not looking at? You know, again, there's no judgment here. This is just old energy that needs to get out. That's all. We all have it. Everybody has trauma of some sort. In fact, it's almost impossible to go without it because the reality is no one is really so conscious that they can override every experience that we come across, you know. I still to this day, sometimes if I get caught off guard, like when my brother died, I ended up with PTSD and I had to go through a lot of stuff to release that from my nervous system, you know, and I was 30 when that happened. So, you know, you don't have to be young, you know, things can happen at any age. It's how you process it and deal with it. So again, if this is something that you've come across and you're trying to figure it out, this is some food for thought for you. I hope that was helpful and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.